Okay, so it's echoey.
That's what that thing is.
Yeah. And I'm trying to keep it away from myself a little more because it picks up, I think. So, yes. So, thanks for being here, and I'm
Thank you.
going to call the meeting to order, and it is 5:03. And I need a motion to approve the agenda for the board workshop meeting.
So moved.
Brian,
Second?
Rich, all in favor? Aye. We're all here, 7-0. And if you're watching from home, friendly reminder that this is a workshop, so it's different than our business meeting. This is where we have the opportunity to ask questions and do more interaction with presentations that we are provided. So today, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Provenzano so we can get started.
Mr. Stevens, you want to come on and have the team come forward too? We'll be doing some introductions. But before I do that, I just want to say thank you for giving us the opportunity to present and share some of our findings, to let the board know as a whole where we are with our K-8 facilities planning process. And I think one thing that it is important to note that the board had expectations that this was done in a collaborative fashion, which really suits my hopes and aspirations when we're creating a project just so we can get multiple people involved, as the board's aware. I believe we had a few board members who are part of this, Dr. White, Ms. Christensen, and Alice Pacer. President.
Right, I'm just gonna, just so you know, because these things are so sensitive, when you touch the.
Oh, yeah, I'm like, yeah, it's like,
You got it.
it's part of
So
my,
I was gonna say,
don't
maybe,
move.
Alright, so it was
maybe
Turn
just
down the
take a,
frequency. Can we
take a
turn down the
step back,
frequency?
maybe.
So we're
Sorry.
here today to talk about the process that we've had. As you know, there was multiple different meetings that we had with our K-8 facilities planning team. They were reviewing building condition surveys, and that included building priorities as well. You know, it's hard for me not to do this because, you know, this is what I do. See, I'm adapting. And then in August, we gave a report to the Board of Education just to sort of talk about our process. By October 1st, we had another meeting with fiscals and the projections, so we knew how much money we were looking at and the ranges that we're looking at. Very rough sense. We're going to be narrowing that down tonight, as you'll find out. Then we started categorizing the project, and it started to look like a project. We continued to bring this information back to the Board of Education, and we had a third meeting on December 10th with all the stakeholders, again, right here at FHS, to refine the scope even further. And they even continue to give us feedback, which is good. We're really in a good position where we are in our process. So tonight we're going to be speaking to where we are. And it really is starting to look like a project, as the board instructed me to do in a collaborative sense. We're going to talk about project parameters and the fiscal implications as well. And the board will have an opportunity to ask questions and to gain a deeper understanding and hopefully understand our next steps, because if I continue to get okay from the board, we will continue to explore this. There were some very specific pieces that we were communicating to the facilities planning team. The board gave me parameters of no additional cost to the taxpayers, utilization of capital reserves. We have capital reserves, which I know we'll be talking about tonight, and make sure that we use maximum cost allowances, which is aid generated towards each building. Each building has different MCAs, as we call them, which we'll be explaining tonight. So that allows us to do work at maximum aid. So this is good value for our community. It protects our investments and also fits our needs for our school programming. Some themes that we came up, and again, you've seen these themes, but in general, when you talk about the building condition survey, it's about useful life, right? A lot of our buildings, as we found out over the past several weeks, with a couple water main breaks, one that impacted Minerva Deland and one impacted JP while no one was in session, health and safety, and critical infrastructure like ventilation and air management. And we know how important that is. We have air handling systems in some of our buildings that are as old as the buildings are. So we feel compelled to address those pieces. and designated classrooms and toilet rooms, which you'll see tonight, and HVAC variations in large group instruction and assembly areas. And it goes along with, I think, what Dr. Morris shared today, the governor on Friday.
Yep, just really quick. I know I shared this with the board, but for everybody, the governor recently, I don't know if it was Friday, but one of the pieces of legislation that she signed was the hot schools law. I don't know how to refer to it, but it's the law that says that schools have to close if a room is above 88 or 89 degrees. I'm not sure the exact temperature. 80, wasn't it? 88. Okay, thank you. And I know there was some stuff with that legislation, but I know this is something that it's not a surprise. It's been in the works. The team's been taking this into consideration, but I think it goes into effect 25, 26. So I'm very grateful that the team's kept that mindful, along with the taxpayer implication of we can't just throw AC in all of our buildings.
Not sustainable. I'm going to let Mr. Stevens come forward to talk a little bit more about what we developed.
Great. Thank you and good evening. So first to introduce the team, there'll be kind of a little bit of jumping around in terms of the different areas of who's speaking to which piece. But you know Brian Belair with Campus Construction, Troy Williams, Labella, and with us tonight is Christine Crowley with Fiscal Advisors. As we continue to navigate through the refinement of scope, it starts to really develop more so, and then that's when we bring fiscal in even deeper in terms of evaluating that information to align it with maximum cost allowance at each building and aidability as a whole as we're determining overall project cost. So real quick agenda, look at the improvement, the scope of work, and I believe we'll be breaking off in a little bit to take a look at some of the work that took place at the December 10th K-8 facilities planning team meeting that took place, some of the different pieces of feedback we received that continue to help us hone in on what the final scope will look like. And then look at, after that, look at the conceptual estimate of all that together, and then narrow down scenarios in terms of the total project value and capital building reserve usage. So I'll turn it over to Troy to kind of talk through the different scope pieces and themes before turning it over to looking at the different information.
Thanks.
Nice new mic. Good night, everyone. Like every project that we embark upon, we typically like to combine or group scope of work together into common themes. This equates to a good sense of getting good value for your money spent on bid day, when you can group like things together. There's an economy of scale that's gained. So as we look through for each building, or as you look at on the boards, you'll see common things that will be the same across the board, like the DDC upgrades, clock and PA system, fire alarm systems, and upgraded electrical service. The upgraded electrical service serves two functions, whereas that there's new equipment that we're proposing to put in that will require that upgrade, and also BCS items of outdated panels that need to be replaced. On top of that, in each building there will be some select scope of work. This consists in some cases of kitchen cafeteria reconstruction, classrooms, toilet rooms, and then various interior space improvements that don't really fall under a category for each building. And then there will also be the replacement of original HVAC equipment. In many cases, these are air handling units that are original to the building from buildings from the 50s and the 60s. Sure.
These are some of the considerations as we look through the development of the project. So first, assumptions, vote in the fall of 25, look at our debt service schedule, and like Troy mentioned, opportunity costs as a whole, figures for escalation, useful life, those pieces of developing the project. Building condition survey items, those are prioritized as a whole, life safety, and the useful life, again, looking at that aging equipment as a whole related to the project. And then when it comes to construction, scheduling and phasing, that's why when work is broken up across buildings, we have to look at those pieces because that determines, one, what the schedule looks like. That impacts escalation, that impacts bidding, all of those different pieces as a whole in terms of having that work spread out across buildings, and not just all taking place in a particular building. Because one, we're working with, for the most part, 2 months in the summer, and then after that, we are working with the buildings, with swing space, and having construction take place during the school year, because that does happen. We saw that at the high school as we worked through the science classroom renovation work. And then scaling the project scope to manage the budget and the impact financially, economies of scale, like Troy mentioned, and then looking at our state building aid ratio and our maximum cost allowance piece as a whole, as we'll look at following the review of the different scope pieces. So that's all considerations that come together in developing the project. I'll give it back to Troy.
Perfect.
Sorry.
Thanks. So, like everything else, we couldn't afford everything that we would want to do. So we had to start coming up with a list of priorities that guided the team in how we approach each building. The essential building systems, for example, that we talked about, which were part of the whole themes, sort of, the same items from the themes, and then the facility upgrade requests. These are priorities that were brought to us, in the various meetings that we had here with stakeholders at the building level. And they aligned from classrooms, toilet rooms, large group instructional spaces, assembly spaces, kitchens and cafeteria. Another big wish list item that was consistent across the buildings was the request for air conditioning being added. We tried our best to look and see how best that could be incorporated. In the end, we came to the happy medium middle ground of looking at assembly spaces, large group instructional spaces, where we could get the best bang for our buck in terms of being able to fit more kids in that space if it was a hot day. For example, just knowing that things were probably coming down the line, or the legislative line, so to speak, and see how we could best address those. So, alphabetically, here's a great example, Brooks Hill Elementary. You'll see as we go through, major renovations have been identified. Brooks Hill is one of those buildings that there haven't been a lot done, let's say, across the board over the years. There's certainly been infrastructural upgrades that we've been kind of laying the groundwork as we've been doing several projects, starting in 2015 when we did all the roofs. 2019 we did the boilers, all right, 19. And here we'll start tackling some of the interior space upgrades that have been requested. So we've got classroom renovations. A major component of those that's very evident when you walk in are how dated the ceilings and lights are. Toilet rooms in a lot of those classrooms as well. There's a Spark Lab, which some work has been done in, and we plan on doing ceilings and lights in there as well to kind of give the space a good refresh. The cafeteria, which has been stated by the end users as a highly utilized space, so it's one of those best bang for your buck situations where we'll be doing a complete refresh, ceilings and lights, painting, flooring finishes, acoustical treatments, HVAC upgrades, which in this case is the big pushes for air conditioning. As part of that, we'll be doing some ceilings and lights in the corridors and toilet rooms. Now, on the BCS replacement side, Brooks Hill is kind of a unique example where we've got one large major piece of HVAC equipment that is serving a wide area within that one building. So if that went down, that wouldn't be good. So in order to replace that one unit, by today's standards, where things have to be code-wise, energy efficiency-wise, it made the most sense to replace it with 3 units. So we'll kind of take a look and see where those serve currently. And then building-wide, like again, I said, DDC control upgrades and the PA system and all the other commonalities there.
So when we say DDC controls, can you explain what that means, please?
Sure. Currently in the buildings, the equipment are being controlled by pneumatic controls. The pneumatic controls are basically the copper lines, mostly copper lines with air, and then there's a controller that regulates how the air moves through and controls those units. Bruce could probably explain it a whole lot better than I could, but instead of like digital controls, you've got pneumatic controls, which is very outdated. It's not as fine tunable as the direct digital controls. You don't have as much oversight and ability to hone in on each space and make fine tune improvements as you will with the updated controls that we're planning to put in.
Hey, Trick.
Sure.
On top of that, pneumatic controls, there's, especially when they're as old as they are, you'll have air leaks. And we'll get the efficiency. The air compressor that supplies the air will run 24 hours a day, nonstop. On top of that, the actuators won't respond the way you want them to because there will be an air leak and it won't close the way you want it to, so you're wasting energy that way. And then just the finite control you have, even when everything's working properly, it's a lot easier to diagnose. I mean, if there's an air leak in the wall somewhere, you'll never find it, you'll never hear it. So it's late 60s to early 70s technology. Time to move away from it.
And personnel to work on that equipment
And the
for you.
personnel to work on it.
Almost
I have a
non-existent.
question.
Sure.
A community member actually asked me this. She spends a lot of time as a volunteer at Brooks Hill, and she said the heat is very uneven. Like the PTA closet, things are like melting, and other rooms are freezing. So does the digital control, does that help with the evenness, or is that just an aspect of old buildings?
It helps from the idea that we would no longer have those leaking systems. Because again, if the system is when the air leaks and it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, the default setting is for those heating valves to fail wide open so that you don't freeze your building. So if it's leaking and it's not operating properly, yeah, it will help. Now, that being said, it's not going to fix it in an instant because once you maintain and control that variable, now it's time to investigate the other things that are also still, 50 and 60 years old. So it'll get us to the next step of doing that. But if you're asking me if we changed it today, is it going to fix everything tomorrow? No.
So here's an answer that's really frustrating to hear for some people. These are wide open, big buildings, right? There's doors cracked. There's natural airflow. We're bringing air in. We're taking air out. Again, doors are opening throughout the day. 30 plus years, this has always been something that we try to, but you don't replicate home. So.
So on the three wings above in Brooks Hill, there are the three classroom wings. Those are all currently being served by one mechanical room space and one set of equipment. The plan is to replace that unit with 3 units. So we've got some contingency there, should anything ever occur. Along with that, we plan on doing upgrades to the ceilings and lights in those spaces. And the toilet rooms on a select level depending on how the budget aligns. We also plan on taking care of the multi-user toilet room that's colored in pink/red there in the middle, and then the cafeteria at the bottom in green, along with all the updates we talked about, and then the Spark Lab off to the right. So on a whole, we'll be touching or planning to do some work on on a wide area in this building, for an example. So as you guys walk around and see the little show and tell, the colors align with the legend that's up in the top right hand corner. So it just makes sense to kind of read and see, and it's not the same across each building. So
And for everybody else, there's also an estimated cost-ish on the top left of the posters. Sorry, one question that came up when we were doing this last week, and we're talking about lighting changes. A lot of teachers mentioned wanting dimmable lighting.
Yes.
Is that something
Yes.
that'll be available?
Yes.
Oh, to have dim.
When we do it, it is.
That's
Is
wonderful.
that just in the classrooms, or will that also apply to the cafeteria and the hallways and the Spark Lab and other places that are getting lights?
Hallways have code requirements for like minimums, and typically we don't dim the hallways, but in all the student occupied spaces for sure. Yeah.
Like cafeteria and Spark Lab would?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It would be set up in such a way when we have user group meetings, similar to how we did the cafeteria here, where we had different programs that we knew were going to be in there, and we had it designed in such a way to be able to accommodate these different programs.
I'm guessing bathrooms are also not dimmable
I would
lights.
think so now.
Okay, all right. Just for my own knowledge, thanks.
And one other thing that came up, just to say to the board, when we were doing the meeting last week, the middle schools, some space for construction that had been considered at the first two meetings was the fax classrooms. And then there had been some feedback at the last meeting that that might not be exactly what the building wants. So could you explain a little bit that like square footage you kind of started to explain it, Mr. Provenzano, at the last meeting, that it could be moved around, but
So
that's the idea?
At this point in the project, or process, I should say, we realize that there might be some changes, but what's not going to change is the square footage. And we're also going to be looking to maximize aid. So the team's going to go back over the next several weeks and look at the spaces, go back to the teams in the building and making sure that it's getting the corresponding aid. And then at the end of the day, we really don't care, where. It's just about, can we maximize aid? The square footage is the square footage because it's not going to impact the dollar amount. But we need to go back to the users.
And I
think,
wasn't,
sorry. I think I really appreciate that you're going to go back to the team and see what is the biggest need, but that we know approximately what we're doing.
Absolutely.
And
No. I just want to add to that a little bit. So, right now, how costs are estimated are based on the existing space and the square footage and what it would also take in that space to do work. As we're navigating through it, the overall square footage of construction could slightly change depending on the space being reviewed. We're looking at the costs that relate to those and how that'll translate, then comparing it to other work that could have to take place in that space, because as we looked at a fax room, that may have had certain things taking place, but if we look at a different space, there may be inherently some other work that should go along with that, like efficiencies we've talked about, and then we want to compare it to the maximum cost allowance piece and make sure it still falls within the realm of what we were trying to accomplish for no additional tax impact after capital building reserve. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later when we look at the two overall estimates that we have that are still general, but Christine will talk about as the scope gets refined and developed, what then her team does in working with campus and Labella to define that information and then determine where are we really at that building for aidability of that work. So that'll all be balanced as a whole through the project development.
Yeah, I think what you can do right now is take a moment to see what's happening in each building. You'll see notes because these were our users giving us some feedback, and that's what we were just talking about, the considerations. So take a few moments, and then we'll have I think.
so,
These are the drawings that are in the.
yeah.
and the handwriting is from last week's meeting.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you were going to go through each slide. So yeah, these correspond to the slides here. And then when you saw last time when we walked around, that was the first run at it where people gave feedback. So these are updated boards with newer, as Mary
We
Caitlin
figure
said.
instead of like reading at you, we'd let you sort of
Yeah.
peruse it, and then we can go back and capture it.
Yep.
Have their notes from last week been like processed by the team?
Not yet.
No, so I should not ask
That-
any
this-
follow-up question about that. Thank you.
We're too far ahead.
Thank you. one would notice when you look at Dudley Northside, we started to tackle the classroom wall, firewall issue. As you know, the partition doesn't go all the way to the floor in most of the classrooms. So Troy's going to talk a little bit about how we came about that and what we learned from what was occurring throughout the state, and give a little context on how we started to approach that.
Absolutely. So we've all been through the building, as Brett's mentioned. There are some walls in the quarter walls that don't go all the way to the floor, and then there are the cubbies that are on the outside there. And it's been raised as a security concern. There is an inherent building code concern there, as the wall is not 1 hour rated as it needs to be. So what we did was suggest to make a good faith effort here by taking a stab at identifying some rooms that we could start setting up a prototype to address to the state, that if it was ever brought up by the state to say, hey, you guys are doing all these other spaces and doing all these other upgrades, but here is a potential problem. Well, here we're starting to address that problem, and like everything else, we can't tackle it all at once, and we're showing that we're making good strides to start tackling that issue.
We didn't want to get it tied up at SCD when we were in the planning
Correct.
phases, and this, again, we had to go back to the users and talk to them and share with them what we've learned, and I think it's a credit to our Labella team of recognizing that, and I think our teams understood that too. So, any thoughts, questions, or wonders?
As we touch cafeteria space, I know at the high school, one thing that's been amazing has been the dishwashers. Will that be worked in?
If it is outlined as a priority moving forward by the district to have a dishwasher system in the, areas where we are modifying or reconstructing the kitchen, then
That's
Then
JA
yes.
right now.
Yeah. And then another thing that had been brought up by sustainability a while back was just putting a sink in cafeterias so that liquids could be tossed or down the sink rather than tossed into garbages.
sure, we've yet to reconvene, with end users on very specifics within these spaces. So I'm sure that there will be a lot of design issues like these that come up where we can see some efficiencies and make strides on top of what we've done here at the high school. Progress is somewhat expected.
I was just gonna comment, because it was brought up at the meeting as well. So the cost will not be the same across buildings. So it's not the same across the board, which I know can be hard, but everybody needs something different. And one of the examples was the gym at JP, that it would be getting air conditioning. And the reasoning is because it's used so much by the community as a whole.
It has spectators.
And it has spectators. I just wanted to bring that up. That's why, because it is probably used the most besides the high school.
Whereas Brooks Hills Gym, they're not planning to air condition, but they're air conditioning the cafeteria. Along with what Dr. White was saying with the sink in the cafeteria, I know at the high school they have hand washing stations in the cafeteria. Is that something being considered for the lower level?
So I think as we move through, right, the scope and understanding how far those dollars can go, that's all part of the process. The good thing is we're early on, and there's still lots of design phase that needs to occur if the board chooses to continue to move forward. But it is all relative to how much money and the bids that come in, and that's all part of the process.
Is it something end users have brought up or no?
Nope.
Okay.
I don't think we haven't gotten into the fine detail of those user group meetings. That's already. I mean, typically it starts out here where it's just a big blue blob on the screen and it's square footage, and then you see like on the far right hand there, we've started to throw out some concepts of what this thing could be, and it's just to get the conversation going with the teachers, with the admin and staff, and so on, to say, well, that looks okay, but can we get storage on top? And there will be a point where we get down to if this thing will be a drawer versus a door.
So we'll bring in those users. We'll bring in the cafeteria staff. We'll bring Michelle Rasavich. We'll bring in our sustainability leaders, principals, So that's the next phase. This is the ish phase. Yeah, did you want to? All right, you gonna jump in at the tail end? All right, so this is our current estimate. As you can see, you've seen some of these before, some of the values coming in. We started out really high at like $220 million when we had everything included. So as we hone the scope and refine it, these numbers get dialed in. One of the things that's construction by building, we have a construction contingency, that's just for unknowns that we discover within the building or owner requested changes. And then the incidental budget, that's covering construction costs, construction design costs, labella, campus, as well as insurances and financing. One of the things to keep note that we also have escalation built in here. So, I mean, we're gonna vote December of 25 roughly, so October 25. October. So we have escalators built in, so when it comes out to bid in the spring of 27, that our pricing is accurate. So.
So you can see currently where we are at about 72.6 million. Again, this is based on the snapshot that we saw. Any of the changes, the design team will have to go back, then give information to campus. Campus will price out, then we'll work with fiscal on the next piece. The slide here is narrowed down from where we saw over the many different iterations. I think we had a 40 million, a 50 million, 60, all those different examples in terms of how much capital building reserve would it take for X dollar amount of a project with the different assumptions and pieces. And I'll turn it over to Christine to kind of talk through the next few pieces. But right now, where we are, you can see a 72 million estimate based on about where we were, 74 million based on using 14 million of capital reserve. And that is around, these numbers are close to where a project could land with our capital building reserve. And Christine will talk a little bit more about why numbers could fluctuate a little bit as they're going through and what these means in terms of the bond percentage. So I'll turn it over to Christine. You've heard me plenty of times probably talk about the fiscal pieces, and we'll let her kind of go through the rest.
Thank you very much, Matt. Okay, good evening, everyone. So as Matt said, we've narrowed it down. We have the 72 and 74 million shown up on the screen. And so it's plus or minus that 72, 74 million that we're trying to hone in on. And so we also show the capital reserve that would be used. That's a savings account that the district has established for capital projects. And it's used almost like a down payment. So we have the total capital project of that 74 million. Let's use that as our example. And we would borrow the difference between the project amount and the capital reserve. So that's a terrific thing. We're saving on all of that interest. That also, in essence, takes care of the local share, if you will, between the building aid ratio of 77.7% and 100%. So the state of aidable scope will reimburse you 77.7 cents on every aidable dollar. So that's a terrific reimbursement that we have from the state. And so then the bond percentage, that's the percentage of the whole project that we would deem as aid eligible. And our job is to review all the scope as you guys go through and determine what you'd like to have as part of the project. Labella and campus will come back and show us what that scope looks like. And we'll be able to look through and see and determine, is that going to be aid eligible or not? And that 95% might shift from that 95% to a different percentage. And we provide that back to the district, where then you can go ahead and make a decision. Do we want to go with, maybe it's a higher bond percentage, which is higher aidability, terrific. Maybe it's lower. If it's lower, is that palatable to the district, or is that something that you want to revise scope to come back into where we're closer to that 95%? Okay. And then we have our assumptions listed, how we got to the referendum size and the capital reserve usage. So again, referendum in fall of 25, which we talked about. We want debt to start in 28, 29, and I'll show you some schedules that I believe you've seen somewhere before that we can talk about that and show you what that looks like. We have our building aid ratio and bond percentage that we discussed. Those are estimated, and again, we will review and make sure they're falling within maximum cost allowances and make sure that everything looks as it will to maximize that aid. The state pays an interest rate on your building aid payments, so they know that you have to amortize your debt over 15 years because they're repaying you building aid over 15 years. So because they know you have to borrow, they'll pay you a small interest rate back as part of that payment. So that's 2.75% right now we have estimated in there. Then we have our borrowing rates of 4% for both the bond and the bond anticipation notes. And those are just two different borrowing tools or instruments that we use throughout the capital project. And I can get into that further if you want me to, but I could go into a rabbit hole with it. And then if for any reason in any year your aid exceeds where your debt service payments are, then we would say that that money should be put into a debt service fund so that it can be used to offset future debt service payments. So that that aid isn't absorbed by your operating side, where it's a one-time, one-shot revenue, if you will, where you have a hole afterwards. Okay. So here we have our overview of debt service where we are today. So you can see the blue line is your debt service and capital outlay project expenses. The red line is your estimated building aid that would be coming back, so that's your revenue back to the district. And then the green line is the difference between those two, which is the local share or the tax levy that has to be levied for capital projects. What a district's goal should be is to keep the local share level so you don't have any spikes or any valleys. So then you can accomplish the capital needs that the district has and not have to have any major fluctuations in your tax levy for the related to capital. And so if you look at this chart here, you can see between 27, 28, and 28, 29, we start to see a slight drop in that green line. And so that's where this project would layer in and keep that more level, that green line, the local share. And I'll show you that right here. So here, if we first start back up with the blue and the red, then we'll get to the nice level green line. The blue and the red, you can see in 28, 29, we have that spike up in debt service and building aid. That's the project coming on. So that's our new expenses and our new revenues. But you can see the green line, the tax levy, that's level. And you can see it's level right out through 38, 39. And so that's our goal, to be able to accomplish capital project needs of this size and not have a tax impact where you're increasing taxes for capital project. You're remaining level. Oops, sorry about that. So that first one we were just looking at, this is a $74 million with a $14 million of capital reserve. And then this one is the $72 million with a $13.2 million of capital reserve. So you can see, in essence, at the end of the day, those lines are about the same. So from here, what our job is, again, is to look at all of the scope that the district is contemplating, putting that into our financial model and saying, are we within our maximum cost allowances by building? And you all are comfortable with what a maximum cost allowance is? Excellent. So we'll look at that and we'll break it up between that construction and incidental that you saw on the slides before. And we'll also look at the individual scope items for aidability to make sure that they're aid eligible items. So again, we'll go through that financial model and we'll provide it back to the district with each iteration as to where you are from a financial perspective. The current project that is just closing up, I think it's 2018 authorization? 2019, it feels like forever ago. 2019 authorization. So those reports, the final reports for that project are being submitted to the state this month. So those final costs are now known. So that also plays a role in this because those maximum cost allowances, some of those buildings overlap to this project. So we need to make sure that what those final costs are, that's what the state will see as far as what's being held against the maximum cost allowances at this point. So it's kind of an evolution of, as things are finalized and changed, we update and make sure the district is up to speed on where the financials look like. So with that, I believe that's my last slide. Yes, so turn back over to Troy. Absolutely.
So next steps will be to help define and answer some of the questions like you were asking about specifics in those spaces. Further define the scope, sharpen our pencils, see where we can make trade-offs as needed, and just work collaboratively, knowing that it's going to be give and take, and we can't have everything, unfortunately.
Yep, so that sort of outlines where we're headed. We're doing this today. In January, we're going to meet with our building administrators further and their building teams to sort of, bring back the ideas that they've volleyed to us, and hopefully narrow the scope down even further. Definitely narrow the scope down further. And then internally, we're developing a public information campaign. So that's under development in the works right now. And then return back here in February with an updated scope so you could see where we end up. And then if the board continues to want us to move forward in April, confirm the scope and the use of the capital reserves and the vote date. It's a decision point for the board. So that's like the last time that the board could, give me one last final charge to move forward, because then, as you know, we need to introduce the initial seeker resolution and the lead agency, and between April and October, we need to get the information out to our community so they're informed, and our staffs as well. And in August, confirm the secret determination and proposal resolutions, because it's 45 days before the vote day. And then the community referendum would be in October, before October, or by October 31st. Any questions? It's great to see it come and evolve. Started in a hot day here in July, and this is where we are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, team.
Thanks, everyone.
It is exciting. Okay. We're right back. So we actually have time to move into executive. So I need a motion to enter into executive session for matters pertaining to the job performance and employment history of individuals in a non-collective bargaining unit. The Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Doug Leff, Superintendent Brett Provenzano are invited to attend.
So moved.
Rich and Lisa? All in favor? Aye. 7-0. Yeah, and if you're listening from home, we're gonna break now, but we'll be back at 7 p.m. for our business board meeting.